Okay, couple of things. Y'all, I guess for the most part, had the weekend off. I think we had a test. Everybody, looks like everybody completed it. I checked on the grade book, so it should be available for review because it was finished on, I guess the deadline was Friday, so you should have been able to review your test over the weekend or at least Monday. And so I had a couple of people ask about that, and so I think it's working. Overall, it looked like people did pretty well, so pleased about that. We're again close to the end of the term. I've got this week, so today and Thursday we'll be wandering through muscular system. As I said a minute ago, visible body has a nice section that goes through the muscular introduction and muscle contraction. So I'll hit some highlights in a notes outline that I have today that shouldn't take too long. And then I'm going to post the visible body so that you have a muscle section to do. Sorry, give me 1 second. I have a dog causing problems, sorry. Where was I? I am going to post the muscle tissue section on visible body and have practice quizzes available for this week, and then a graded visible body quiz. So that'll be out there as well. So spend the time going through the muscle section that I add for visible body. I'll send out an email about that and go through the practice quizzes, and then there'll be a graded quiz. So that again is on visible body. With that being said, in wrapping things up, this week, we're going to go through and try to get muscular system out of the way. That leaves next week, which is basically a wrap-up week. We'll do the nervous system for that. And then I think we're down to the end, like July 30th, when you'll have your final exam and whatnot. So, all right, with that being said, let's get rolling on muscular system. Add one more person. Okay, so I'll post this outline like I have for the other things. I'll post the Zoom lecture so you'll have all of that, and I'll send out an email regarding when those are opened up, as well as the visible body sections made available. So you should have all that stuff. Shouldn't be any problem. Y'all are, I guess, used to it by now. Couple of things. I think visible body is a really nice job going through the introduction to the muscular system. That's going to be chapter 13 and 14 of visible body. So that's what you'll be working through this week. But there's also some things I want to just, I guess, clarify and make sure that you get, because it's either stuff that I don't think visible body highlights enough, or it's something that they basically miss. So in starting the muscular system, like we've done most chapters, we've got myology. All right, the study of ology is the study of my. Anytime you see that, it's basically referring to muscles. Myology is the study of muscles. That word, muscle, and myology comes from a scientific name. It is musculus. All right, this is the scientific name for a house mouse. So your muscular system is named after a common little house mouse. It is named that because a long time ago, people thought it looked like little rodents running around under the skin when they flex. So when people flex their muscles, they thought it looked like they had little rodents running around. So hence we named them muscles after a house mouse. There are some general characteristics of muscle tissue. And so these are all essentially separate definitions that refer to the characteristics of your muscle tissue. First and foremost, your muscle is excitable. That means it can receive and respond to a stimulus. That stimulus is going to be in the form of an action potential. You'll see and get to visualize one of those as it goes through a muscle contraction in visible body. So it shows a nice demonstration of this. But when we say it receives and responds that it's excitable and receives and responds to a stimulus, that is basically a voltage, an action potential from a nerve of your body telling the skeletal muscle to essentially respond. And when it responds, it basically has contractility. That means that when it contracts, it gets shorter and thicker. Flex your bicep muscle right now. In other words, flex your arm at the elbow. You can see that biceps on top of your arm get thicker and fatter. It's shorter, all right? It is also extensible. That essentially means that it has the ability to stretch. In other words, when you extend your arm back out, that muscle is technically stretching, all right? And when you let it relax, it has elasticity. That essentially means it returns to its original shape. Think of it almost like a rubber band. A rubber band can extend, all right, but because it is elastic, it returns to its original shape when you let it go. Ideally, you could see this. A good example is people that have torn their Achilles heel, their calcaneal tendon. If I was to cut, there was a scary movie about that. Like, I forget. Oh, I can't come up with it. Anyway, if I sit there and I cut your Achilles heel, then essentially what you would see is your big calf muscle, gastroc muscle, basically return to its original shape. It would bulge up in your leg. So it's extensible. So again, think of it like a rubber band. You can stretch a rubber band. That means it can extend. It's extensible. And when you let that go, because it's stretched, it is elastic and returns to its original shape. All right. There are some general functions of muscles. I didn't list them all out here in the outline section, but we can essentially walk through some of that. General functions of your muscle. Obviously, function-wise, you have motion or you have movement. A muscle moves when it contracts, when it shortens. That moves your body or moves things through the body. All right, you move air, you move blood, you move your arms and your legs. That is one of the major functions. Your muscles help you to maintain your posture. So one of the things is to help maintain posture. And that helps maintain posture actually whether you're thinking about it or not. All right, your mom or dad may say, hey, sit up straight, sit up straight. So you can think about sitting up straight and you can use your skeletal muscles to hold you up. But if you, for example, get bored in class and you start to doze off, you're getting tired, I almost guarantee that before you pass out and hit the table, you'll catch yourself. Your body helps you maintain your posture. That's another job of your muscles. All right. When we finished up the skeletal system, we talked about the joints of the body. One of the jobs of your muscles and those joints is it helps to stabilize and strengthen the joints. So muscles help stabilize and strengthen the various joints of the body. And last but not least, and there's probably several more functions we could come up with, one of the things we often overlook is your muscles help with some heat production. Anytime a muscle contracts, that requires energy. Any byproduct of energy is heat production. Again, in times when you're cold, that you shiver and stuff like that, your muscles are helping you to generate some heat to keep you warm. All right, there are three main types of muscle tissue, and if we have enough time, we will wander through the three types of muscle tissue. Now, we spend most of our time focusing on skeletal muscle. That is because most muscles of the body are skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles are voluntary. They are muscles that we actively control. In other words, you have to sit there and basically say, I'm going to flex my arm. I'm going to walk. I'm going to move my arm. I'm going to move my body. That is your skeletal muscles. All right. Back when we introduced tissues and whatnot, we should have seen that skeletal muscle is striated. There are striations. So it is striated. And one of the other neat things about your skeletal muscle is that it is multinucleated. Most cells of your body only have one nucleus per cell, but skeletal muscles are a little unique, and you should have seen that again in the tissue slides that you looked at as well. And we'll highlight as I show you some pictures a little bit later. But if we take a single muscle cell, which is basically the shape of a cylinder, and you look within it, well, you should see the striations. Those striations, again, are the result of something called actin and myosin and how they overlap. But if you look closer in addition, you'll notice that a single skeletal muscle cell, if this is one muscle cell, it has multiple nuclei. That's kind of a unique feature. All right, if we compare that though to your cardiac muscle is involuntary. This is again found only in the heart. All right, it is involuntary because you don't have to sit there until your heart contracts. It does it all by itself because it utilizes something called the autonomic nervous system. All right, that is your involuntary response. Again, you don't have to sit there and actively keep telling your heart to contract. It, like skeletal muscle, is also striated. So when you look at it, it has the same or similar striations to that of skeletal muscle. All right, so you cannot distinguish smooth and cardiac because of striations. Those striations, again, in cardiac muscle, it's the same overlapping pattern of the actin and myosin filaments. Now you can look at it because cardiac muscle is more spindle shaped and it is much shorter. In other words, it will have striations, but if we can compare a single muscle cell to a single cardiac muscle cell, your cardiac muscle cell is about 20 times shorter and smaller than a muscle cell. One of the ways, though, you can distinguish it is because in addition to striations, it has something called intercalated discs. That's where more than one cardiac muscle cell is linked together. So it joins individual cardiac muscle cells. It tends to be uninucleated. That means one nucleus per cell. So unlike skeletal muscle, it has one nucleus per cell. And the last type of muscle tissue is smooth muscle tissue. Smooth muscle tissue is what you find in much of your viscera, digestive organs, all right, your lungs, much of the digestive system, arteries, veins, vessels are smooth muscle. These, like cardiac, are also involuntary. You don't have to sit there and think about these muscles contracting. They just work. They work on their own. They are not striated. So they still have those actin and myosin filaments that I was mentioning. They just don't overlap in a pattern that then gives the appearance of being striated. And we'll look more about that again as we see some of these pictures here in a sec. And like cardiac, they are uninucleated, one nucleus per cell. Similar to cardiac and in comparison to skeletal muscle, these are also relatively short, about 20 times shorter than a skeletal muscle. So cardiac and smooth muscle are much smaller and shorter when compared to skeletal muscle. All right, so if we start getting into some of the structure and function of skeletal muscles, one of the things you should understand is that your skeletal muscle consists of parts that are surrounded by connective tissue layers. So what you're looking at here in this picture is our muscle. The muscle itself, when we say skeletal muscle, is what you see in red. All of the white stuff, it ends up being connective tissue support. All right, we'll talk about that in terms of these mesial layers. Mesial, that's what I'm shortening for an epimysium, endomysium, paramysium. Collectively, they're called mesial layers. and a tendon that then attaches to a bone. But it is the red that is physically, technically our muscle. Okay? So one of the things you should also recognize is as we start walking through, what we're going to do is work from this big picture of a muscle. So if I was to talk about like your biceps muscle that you feel like, or a big muscle of your leg, then that is the collective general term, a giant muscle. But that muscle is a collection of other structures that then work us down to the muscle cell. So a thing I say oftentimes when I'm in the classroom is you have to look at this structure as a whole, and what we're going to do is recognize that a muscle is a collection of circles. So you see this big muscle right here, and then a collection of circles. And then if we look in here, you see another collection of circles. And I'm going to zoom in on some other pictures, and you'll even see within those circles, there are more circles. So as we work from what we consider the macroscopic, what you could see, down to the tiny cell and microscopic level, we're going to be looking at circles upon circles upon circles and what supports those circles. Okay. Your skeletal muscle is surrounded by connective tissue wrappings. They are called fascia. All right. So that's a collective term for the connective tissue, the fascia of the body. That fascia is these mesial layers that then become the tendon. Technically, we call it a fascia as a collective whole. All right. But these layers, the mesial layers or the fascia, surround different levels of a muscle. All right. So they have different names for the different layers that then surround one of those circles. The job of these connective tissue wrappings is they provide some elasticity. They are helping provide some of that stretch and return to its original shape, extensibility of your muscle. They provide protection. They help try to prevent you from overstretching the muscle. And it allows for the entry of various vessels, whether it's blood vessels or nerves and things like that. Those vessels run through this connective tissue wrapping and down to the level of the muscle cells. Well, there's three main types of connective tissue wrapping. There's the epimysium, there's the perimysium, and there is the endomysium. The epimysium is the outermost layer. Epi means outside, outside the muscle. And the epimysium surrounds what's called a collection of muscle bundles. Or muscle fascicles. A muscle fascicle is the same thing as a muscle bundle. All right? Now, make sure those words make sense in the picture that we saw back here. Okay? Each one of these circles, so here's a collective circle. We're actually removing one right here. This whole collective circle is a fascicle or muscle bundle. So, just to make sure that we're understanding here, in this picture, I have 1, here's another one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 muscle fascicles in this muscle group. The muscle group, again, being like your biceps. So in your biceps, you may have 7 muscle fascicles. And what that epimysium does is the epimysium is surrounding all of those structures. Okay, I can give you an analogy, something to picture. I don't have one here in front of me, I don't think. Hey, think of it like all of the crayons in a crayon box. All right, the different crayons would represent fascicles, And the cardboard box that's holding them all together is your epimysium. Okay? Now, if we go to that crayon analogy, remember, if you pulled a crayon out of the box, it would have that crayon wrapping on it, telling you what color crayon it is. Okay, so now each muscle fascicle, each crayon or fascicle within that big giant bundle of stuff has a wrapping around it. That wrapping that surrounds each fascicle like the crayon wrapper. So surrounding this fascicle, be right there, the white pinkish line you see right here, surrounding that fascicle, surrounding that fascicle, surrounding this fascicle, this structure surrounding that, each one is the paramysium. So the paramysium, peri means around, and it surrounds or covers each muscle fascicle. Again, like each, excuse me, like each wrapper of a crayon. All right. You'll notice now that as we get closer then, each muscle fascicle is a collection of circles. So all the circles that you see in this fascicle, each one is a muscle fiber or muscle cell. So in this one fascicle that I'm looking at here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It looks like there are 10 muscle fibers in this muscle fascicle. Hey, let's look at number 4 up here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It looks like there's 12 muscle fibers in that muscle fascicle. So a muscle fascicle may have a different number of muscle cells in each one. All right. So if we pull one of those muscle fibers out, each muscle cell has a wrapping that surrounds it. That is the endomysium. Whoops. The endomysium means within. And an endomysium surrounds each muscle fiber. And again, a muscle fiber is the equivalent of one muscle cell. Let's look at a different picture right quick just to make sure that we recognize and understand, because this is not the same picture that we have above, but you should be able to distinguish all of the structures making it up. Look, this entire thing here, which would go around all of this thing, this is your muscle group. And your muscle group is a collection of muscle bundles, right? I have one muscle bundle coming out here. So here is one muscle bundle. And some of them are hiding, but here would be another muscle bundle. Here would be another muscle bundle. Here's another one. Here's another one. All those muscle fascicles are muscle bundles. So I can count through all of those. All right. This yellow lining surrounding all of the muscle bundles as a whole is your epimysium. Each muscle fascicle, so sitting surrounded right here, each muscle bundle or muscle fascicle is surrounded by a paramysium. So it would be wrapping around that. And as I mentioned, if we look within a muscle bundle, it is a collection of muscle cells. So now here is one muscle cell. Here would be another muscle cell and another muscle cell and another muscle cell. All of these are muscle cells. And remember, a muscle cell has a connective tissue wrapping around it. It is the endomysium. So the endomysium surrounds each of these muscle cells. And if you recall back to a minute ago, I said even within those, there are more circles. So if you remember, a muscle is a circle with circles, with circles, with more circles. And if we zoom in on this, you'd even see more circles as we get down to the microscopic layer. right? All of those connective tissue wrappings have a whitish appearance. And when the muscle ends, those mesial layers become the tendons that then attach your skeletal muscle to the skeleton. Hopefully you could see that in the picture back here above. Let's start with this one. Notice when we were looking at this, I said the muscle is what's actually all in red. Well, you will notice that your muscle itself does not attach to the bone. The muscle in red is ending like right across here. We'll see all these wrappings, the epimysium, the endomysium that you see here, the paramysium, that when the muscle ends is continuing and it becomes the tendon that attaches to the bone. So technically this tendon, as you get to the muscle, is surrounding the outside as an epimysium, is surrounding then or continuing as the paramysium surrounding the muscle bundles, and is continuing as the endomysium. That's that job and protection. We're able to take that connective tissue and help spread some of that support and strength throughout your muscle. You can see the same type thing here in this picture. As this whitish structure is pulled back, you can kind of see the muscle ending right here. The rest of those layers would continue as well, and that's what becomes the tendon. Most tendons are strap-like. On occasion, there are some flat, sheet-like tendons. So if you ever see the word like aponeurosis, that's what we're referring to as a flat, sheet-like tendon. Right? Which brings us to the microscopic anatomy of our skeletal muscle. So as I've mentioned, your skeletal muscle is something that we can see at the microscopic level. You can look down and see your biceps muscle. You could cut your skin away and see the biceps muscle. But as we look closer and closer to the structures making it up, we get down to the microscopic level. So in order from superficial to deep, or what you can see to what you can't, there is the anatomy of a muscle. And it starts with just an example, the biceps muscle. And your biceps muscle is a collection of muscle fascicles or muscle bundles. And each muscle fascicle or muscle bundle is a collection of muscle fibers. Remember, the muscle fiber is the same thing. A muscle fiber is a single muscle cell. And then remember, I said your muscle cells were made of little circles. All of those little circles you saw back here. Oops. All right, so this is one muscle cell and it was made of circles. All of these tiny little circles are what are called myofibrils. And myofibrils are made up of more circles called myofilaments that are arranged into sarcomeres. And it is the sarcomere that basically ends up being the contractile unit of your muscle. All right. Oops. Now, before we get to the anatomy of skeletal muscle fiber, I want to hit, again, I think as you go through visible body, it'll let you work down through the different layers and things like that. I do want to make, have a short discussion about what's called architecture or shape of your muscles, because not all your muscles have the same shape or appearance. A single muscle cell, so when we look at a muscle cell, without a doubt, a muscle cell is a cylinder. But when we talk about a muscle group, your muscle groups have different shapes. All right. Think about it like the muscles making up your arm, and the muscle, whether it's your upper arm or lower arm. Most of those are long, sort of strap-like muscles. But think about the muscles that make up your chest. When you have your pecs that you're working at, your chest muscles, those are more of a triangular shape. Well, they still have muscle fibers making it up, and those muscle fibers are cylinders, but the shape of a muscle group is referred to as its architecture. And the architecture of a muscle is based on the pattern that the muscle cells, the pattern that the muscle cells or muscle fibers, run within the muscle fascicle. So technically speaking, your architecture or shape of a muscle is based off how the muscle fascicles run within a muscle. And there are 5 main types of architecture based off the pattern of those muscle bundles. Number 1 architecture muscle bundle-wise is parallel. And in a parallel muscle bundle, it is because if you have a bone and that muscle, we'll draw one in red. So if this is the bone and then you have a muscle, if the muscle and its muscle fibers run parallel with the bone, then that gives you a parallel architecture. Many of the muscles of your forearm, those extensors and flexors, if you've started learning those, have that parallel architecture. There's a subset of parallel. Some books do it as a subset. Some books do it as separate. I keep it as separate. Fusiform. Fusiform has basically the same definition. You have a bone and the muscle runs, and the muscle bundles and muscle fibers are running parallel with the bone, except that it tapers at each end. So the pattern is still the same, but the muscle narrows at the end. In other words, the muscle is thicker in the middle than at the end. Your biceps, your triceps are really good examples of those. The next type is convergent. Convergent example that I gave already, your pectoralis muscles, your chest muscles. If we take and look, you have a sternum, your breastbone, if you will, and you have your humerus, your arm out to each side. And when we look at convergent, the muscle on each side, the muscle starts on a broad surface, so it's coming down your sternum, and it converges over where it attaches at the head of the humerus. And so then all of the muscle bundles running within that all converge down to a point, convergent, converging down from a broad surface to a narrow point. Number 4, pennate. Pennate's pretty straightforward. It means feather-like. The muscle bundles tend to be really short and they run perpendicular to the bone. Several muscles of the leg and stuff are like this, but to give it like a pennate, the pattern I'm talking about here, you have the muscle running along the bone, all right? So this, for example, would be like one of your muscles of your thigh, the rectus muscles and whatnot. So if that's the whole muscle, then all of the muscle bundles are running perpendicular to that surface, and hence it looks like a feather. They're really short, but they're powerful muscles. That's again why you kind of find them in the leg and stuff. Built for strength and power. And last but not least, and this is pretty straightforward, pretty easy, there are circular. And the muscle bundles run in a circle. All right, there are two main examples of this. Most openings of the body, you probably introduced this maybe in lab, but orbicularis oculi or orbicularis oris. Oculi, eye, oris, mouth. So the muscles around your mouth, the muscles around your eye run in a circle that allows your mouth to open and close, your eye to open and close. So that's pretty straightforward. Which gets me to then the anatomy of a skeletal muscle fiber. And this is where I'm going to wrap things up because I'm going to let you go through this invisible body. But again, I want you to work through visible body, all the parts, but pay particular attention to, because where I'm leaving off here is that we can get to the anatomy of a skeletal muscle fiber. So now what we are doing is I am telling you that in the picture you see right there, I have zoomed in, whoops, on a single skeletal muscle. Remember, it's circles upon circles, and we're going to zoom in on a skeletal muscle. Whoops. And now what you have is a skeletal muscle. What they've peeled away is something called the sarcolemma. That is a fancy word for your cell membrane. All cells have a cell membrane. Remember that phospholipid bilayer? It has, for a muscle, it's called a sarcolemma. What I want you to recognize in this picture that they don't have on here is, if you recall, this would have a wrapping surrounding that whole thing. That wrapping would be what? The endomysium. It surrounds each muscle fiber. And remember, we said your muscle fiber is a collection of myofibrils. So now we have the myofibrils. Each one of these is a myofibril. And remember, I said your myofibrils are a collection of myofilaments. And this is then what gets us to being able to visualize a sarcomere and the contractile units. Now, one of the things I'm wanting you to make sure you do is go through the anatomical structures that make up a skeletal muscle, the different filaments, knowing what a sarcolemma is, knowing what the sarcoplasm is, knowing what a T-tubule, transverse tubule, that is the same thing you see above as a T-tubule, knowing that it has the same organelles that most of your other cells have. Look, we've got a mitochondria in here. If you could look closer, you would have a nucleus, all right? There's something called a sarcoplasmic reticulum. You need to recognize what that is. In addition to that, it will describe something called a terminal cisternae. Whoops. I don't know how I did that. Whoops. Can I do that? Here we go. All right. It will have a terminal cisternae, and you'll have things referred to a triad. You need to understand these structures because we work through those in order to then start being able to look at a muscle contraction. All right, so in wrapping up, we worked through some of the highlights, introducing muscular system. It's kind of what I wanted to focus on most today, is introducing the muscular system, getting you ready so that you feel a little bit more familiar as you get into visible body. I'm going to open the section of visible body, at least working through chapter 13 of visible body, which is a muscle introduction, and I'll post practice quizzes and a graded quiz for the muscular system. We need to make sure by the time we finish up this week that we're done with all the details of muscles and a muscle contraction so that we can get into the nervous system. So start with the outlines, the notes that you have here on muscular stuff so that you understand these circles upon circles, all right, or working from a muscle group down to a skeletal muscle fiber, and then jump in visible body and spend some time in there getting familiar with the muscular system. All right, that's what I got for the day. I will stop the recording there.